Section 13D.021, due to the declared state of local public health emergency. At this time, I'll ask the clerk to call the roll to verify the presence of a quorum.
Councilmember Gordon.
Here.
Councilmember Cano. Councilmember Reich.
Present.
Councilmember Fletcher.
Here.
Councilmember Schrader.
Here.
Councilmember Cunningham.
Present.
Councilmember Ellison.
Present.
Councilmember Goodman.
Present.
Councilmember Johnson.
Present.
Councilmember Palmisano.
Present.
Councilmember Cano. Vice President Jenkins.
Here.
President Bender.
Here.
There are 11 members present.
Let the record reflect that we have a quorum. The agenda for today's meeting is before us. We do have one amendment to the agenda, and that is an honorary resolution commemorating the 55th anniversary of the Voting Rights Act. Is there a motion to adopt? Well, are there any other amendments to the agenda? Hearing none, is there a motion to adopt the agenda with that amendment?
So moved, Madam Chair.
Second.
Thank you. Clerk will call the roll.
Councilmember Gordon.
Aye.
Councilmember Cano. Councilmember Reich.
Aye.
Councilmember Fletcher.
Aye.
Councilmember Schrader.
Aye.
Councilmember Cunningham.
Aye.
Councilmember Ellison.
Aye.
Councilmember Goodman.
Aye.
Councilmember Johnson.
Aye.
Councilmember Palmisano.
Aye.
Councilmember Cano. Vice President Jenkins.
Aye.
President Bender.
Aye.
There are 11 ayes.
That carries, and the agenda is adopted as amended. Our first item of business is acceptance of the minutes from our regular meeting on July 17th. May I have a motion to accept those minutes?
So moved, Madam President.
Second.
Thank you. Clerk will call the roll.
Councilmember Gordon.
Aye.
Councilmember Cano. Councilmember Reich.
Aye.
Councilmember Fletcher.
Aye.
Councilmember Schrader.
Aye.
Councilmember Cunningham.
Aye.
Councilmember Ellison.
Aye.
Councilmember Goodman.
Aye.
Councilmember Johnson.
Aye.
Councilmember Palmisano.
Aye.
Councilmember Cano. Vice President Jenkins.
Aye.
President Bender.
Aye.
There are 11 ayes.
That carries, and those minutes are accepted. The next item of business is the referral of petitions, communications, and reports to the proper committees. May I have that motion, please?
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. Clerk will call the roll.
Councilmember Gordon.
Aye.
Councilmember Cano. Councilmember Reich.
Aye.
Councilmember Fletcher.
Aye.
Councilmember Schrader.
Aye.
Councilmember Cunningham.
Aye.
Councilmember Ellison.
Aye.
Councilmember Goodman.
Aye.
Councilmember Johnson.
Aye.
Councilmember Palmisano.
Aye.
Councilmember Cano. Vice President Jenkins.
Aye.
President Bender.
Aye.
There are 11 ayes.
That carries, and those matters are referred. With that, we'll proceed to the mayor's regular report on the state of our local health emergency under the order of new business. Welcome, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Madam President. It is good to see all of you after another week with some challenges, but also some significant progress on several key issues. Last week, members of the POGO committee moved to allocate $8.3 million in emergency funding for 3 new Minneapolis shelters that will serve Native residents, women, and medically vulnerable individuals experiencing homelessness, and that's at least 110 to 130 new beds for people who really need them. So this is really big progress, and I know that today's vote caps a ton of work and persistent advocacy from many of you and residents in your respective wards. We had the chance to highlight the progress on those sites and host some of our nonprofit partners and advocates and officials from different jurisdictions over it that have been being led by AICDC over on Cedar. We also have 3 additional emergency regulations since we last met, which I will get into shortly. And lastly, before the presentation, I want to give a nod to Chief John Friedel, who laid out his retirement timeline this week. And the word legacy gets tossed around a lot in moments like these, but over the course of 4 decades, 41 years, I mean it when I say that Chief Friedel has built a legacy in the city. He's helped reshape our department's approach to inclusive hiring and shepherded fundamental advances in firefighter safety for this department. And without fail, he's answered the call whenever he's needed. And what a better legacy than that to leave. So congratulations, Chief, on a remarkable run. It's been an honor to work with you. And with that, I'll dive right in. So to date, there have been 17 emergency regulations. The updates include rescinding of ER 2020-3, which is the adult daycare centers. I believe that Councilmember Schrader brought this up last week. And so beginning July 1st, the Department of Human Services issued additional guidance that allows providers of adult daycare services to resume providing in-person services to people who do not live in congregate settings. The facilities must adhere to physical facility and space requirements and develop a COVID-19 preparedness plan. So still regulation in place, but since we are now in line with the state, it made sense to rescind in this form. The second is rescinding of ER 2020-11, which is congregate care facilities. And it's because a number of the confirmed cases among residents in licensed congregate health care facilities decreased from an average of 55 cases per week in April and May to an average of 7 cases per week in June and July. The decision was made to rescind the original licensed congregate care facilities emergency regulation. Of course, this also allows for many of our senior residents to touch base with their grandchildren and children, which in large part has been difficult or at least restricted. In addition, the state has modified its guidance to ease operational conditions and requirements on those facilities. And so those licensed congregate healthcare facilities may operate in full compliance with all the relevant regulations. Next is the bar closure, which is Emergency Regulation 2020-17. With a recent increase in the number of cases of COVID-19 since opening indoor seating on June 10th, we made the decision to close bar areas in the city. And I want to distinguish the closure of bar areas from closing bars themselves. Essentially, what we are saying is we are allowing and continue to allow table service. Table service is allowed as long as individuals are seated at their table. 4 for those who are non-related, 6 for those who are related. The big difference is that you can't have large number of people crowding around the bar. And here's the reasoning. More than 50% of new cases in Minneapolis continue to be in young adults under the age of 35 who report increased exposure in bars and at gatherings of friends and family. And at least 9 Minneapolis bars have met the state's definition of patron outbreak, with at least 7 patrons testing positive in each one of those respective bars. By the way, that's about half the number of outbreak locations in the entire state. These restrictions are meant to limit the close congregation of individuals, so counter service is now restricted. And a minute ago when I said that it was about half, I meant half with regard to bars. So table seating, as I mentioned, including high tops, will be allowed under the regulation as long as that the patrons follow the existing state guidance. And so they continue to need to have the necessary physical distancing between tables and then the 4 or 6 individual cap. This new measure will affect roughly 640 bars, brew pubs, tap rooms, and adult entertainment businesses, and the regulation goes into effect this Saturday, August 1st at 5 p.m. I'll also note that bar areas or even dance floors can be converted to table areas as long as, again, the guidance is followed. Next is health by the numbers. Total approximate number of completed tests is just over 1 million at this point. roughly 215,000 more since last we met. Total positive cases in Minnesota, there's 53,692, 10,000 more than last time we met. And then the patients who no longer need to be isolated are 46,965. We've had 1,594 deaths. For hospitalization, the total cases requiring hospitalization is 5,112, with 298 hospitalized as of today and 141 in the ICU. For Minneapolis, we've had 6,836 positive cases, over 1,000 more than last we met, 878 hospitalized, 6,036 recovered, and tragically 196 deceased. There should be a graph with Minneapolis demographic information there for you, and we would be happy to answer any questions about that. Based on the latest data from the health department, Minneapolis is at 18 cases per 100,000 compared to about 11 cases per 100,000 for the state. This is up. It was previously around 9 or 10, and so we have definitely seen an uptick on that front over the last month or so. And so these numbers put both Minneapolis and Minnesota in the orange category, which represents some form of accelerated spread. Congregate living facilities in Minneapolis continue to see new cases. I'm not going to dive in too deeply on that front. They account for about 71% of COVID-19 deaths. As a percentage, that's down slightly. It used to be around 82%. For contact tracing, the health department is conducting over 50 case investigations and contact follow-ups for individuals diagnosed with COVID-19 per day. And currently there are 26 investigators, including 6 non-MHD enterprise staff. Of the 6,751 cases in Minneapolis, 85% have been interviewed, 2% have refused, 8% have been lost to follow-up, and 5% are new cases that still need to be interviewed. 30% of interviews in Minneapolis residents are in a language other than English. Moving on to food insecurity, the health department continues to co-host a weekly free food distribution event over at Powderhorn Park, and the event regularly serves approximately 500 to 800 people. For testing, community testing will be offered over at Incarnation Church and Pika Head Start. The health department's long-term care team supported baseline testing at the Minneapolis Public Housing Authority's Heritage Park site for their assisted living residents on July 23rd. For PPE, the health department is assisting with a joint business recovery effort to distribute 500,000 masks, which were provided by the state to businesses, prioritizing distribution to BIPOC-owned businesses and those located in BIPOC communities. I was out there yesterday distributing masks as well, both to the north side as well as to Carmel Mall on the south side. And you know, I was actually very pleased to see that in all locations, people were in fact wearing masks. Health inspectors have completed 569 site visits since indoor dining reopened on June 10th. Additionally, inspectors are reviewing COVID-19 plans during all routine health inspections. As for procurement, as of July 29th, there has been $5,047,639 spent. That's a total is about 4,200 increase and can be attributed to purchase of isolation gowns. And as I often state, this is not the total spend related to COVID-19. That spend is in the tens of millions. For public safety, violent crime is up about 17% year to date, and property crimes are up 3.1% year to date. There were segments of the year in certain precincts where we had previously seen downturns in crime. Much of that was related to COVID-19 and the lack of activity in those respective areas, but yes, we have seen upticks. During the week of July 14th, there were 146 ShotSpotter activations, and during the week of July 21, there were 152 activations. Year to date, this has been a higher shooting victim total than in the last 5 years, with 288 victims. Next closest was in 2016 with 178. So there's a number of other statistics that we can get you. The 2-year percentage change is up 105%. That's with respect to shooting victims. For MPD Strategic Analysis Group, we've compared several periods for response time analysis from 2019 and 2020 data. The most significant difference that we've seen is in response times for priority 1 and priority 0 calls, with an increase of 1.56 minutes from when a call was assigned to first squad arrival. We can get you additional data on that. And for the same time period, there was an increase of about 3.86 minutes for the average time for when a call was entered in the queue to the squad arrival.
Mayor, we have a question from Councilmember Schrader.
Thank you, Council President. Yeah, Mayor, I just wanted to follow up on that. Maybe these are questions for the chief. I think I appreciate the statistics, but it'd be helpful to know what's going on. What is the chief doing in response to this increase in crime? I think it's also important I appreciate the numbers you gave about the increase in response time, but I'm also getting reports that calls are not being answered, that 911 calls are not being answered, and that's extremely distressing to my constituents. So I think that's probably a better question for the chief.
Yes, I can turn it over to the chief if he is there. We do have, there is an impact when there is a decline in the numbers we have on the force. And that is true right now, given some of the resignations that we've seen. I'll let the chief speak to it further, but we are doing everything possible to make sure that we increase times, but there is an impact, and you're seeing it in the numbers. Chief? Chief Arredondo, are you there?
Mr. Mayor, it doesn't appear that Chief Arredondo is on the call with us.
Okay. Yeah, so we can get you additional information, but I have spoken to the chief about this, and we are even looking at relocating even different divisions so that we can further respond to some of these different divisions within MPD, so that we can further respond to both 911 call as well as law enforcement issues. It is an issue, and it is at least in part one of numbers.
Well, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think in addition to just knowing the crime numbers, and I mean, it's one thing to have a reduction in staff. What would be helpful to know is how many arrests are happening. Like, how is the actual crime fighting going? Because I mean, we've seen all the statistics on the crime, but we have a department that is paid for by taxpayers to work on that. And if that's become an issue, we'd like to know why and what specifically is in their way. I mean, I think we go very quickly back to needing more officers, but it needs a much deeper analysis than that, than what crimes are not getting solved and why.
Councilmember, we're happy to provide you the analysis. It's important that we actually review the numbers in that analysis, though. We can't be just dismissing numbers offhand at this point. We need to be looking at the data and actually listening to it. And the data is very clear. Additionally, we will get you numbers on the arrests, because a number of arrests have been made regarding several of the most recent shootings, regarding several of the most significant issues of violent crime, and we would be happy to get you information on those as well. Arrests are being made in those categories. There's a partnership with our U.S. Attorney's Office as well as several different federal agencies to make sure that investigations can take place, and we can have as many individuals responding to these calls as possible. The more people we have investigating, then the more we can divert to actually response time. And so that's ultimately the impact. As has been widely reported, there have been a combination of resignations as well as individuals who have signed up for PTSD, all of which pose an issue in terms of the numbers that we actually have out and their abilities to respond. I'll also note that overtime becomes an issue as well. In order to make sure that we have the right number of people on duty when those who are not there, we need, if there are individuals who are not there for one reason or another, other people need to cover. and thus over time thus increasing the cost, and we're seeing that as well. So for 38th and Chicago, the city continues to engage with the community at 38th and Chicago, working with multiple neighborhood organizations and businesses, as well as on-site meetings. The community members are talking about their concerns, which range from specific thoughts about the intersection to issues of crime and safety in their neighborhoods. Right now, $100,000 has been committed through the amended 2020 budget process, as you know, to support community process and envisioning for a long-term memorial. And art is being created and preserved by dedicated community members with support from the city's public art administrator. On fire.
Mayor, we have a few questions. Councilmember Johnson, then myself, then Councilmember Cunningham. Councilmember Johnson.
Thank you, Madam President. I want to go back to what Councilmember Schrader and the mayor were discussing around really the trends and statistics, because I heard that in this conversation that there are problems with response time and responding to 911 calls. Yet I talked with Inspector McGinty, who's in charge of the 3rd precinct, just the other day, and he said that they are fully staffed for 911 calls in the patrol function, and that yes, there have been impacts from resignations or from the PTSD claims, and that's manifested itself in the chief pulling officers off of some non-patrol functions. But he told me that we were staffed up just as much as before George Floyd's murder, and that we're essentially, from a 911 response standpoint, operating as we normally would. And this ties into my concern, and actually why I supported moving the management for the PIO role, is because the public needs information on this. We need the clarity. It seems like right now there is confusion over what the response times are, what patrol looks like, and the staffing levels. And I just want to get that out there for the public, because I don't think that's helpful when we're hearing from an MPD leader, that, hey, it's fully staffed in one area, but then we're hearing publicly that there are problems with responding to 911 calls. So I think the public really needs clarity. I'm hoping the mayor or the chief can clear this up. And my request would be that we have data that is made publicly available around this, around the staffing levels, that it can live on the website, or we can have something that's kept up to date so that we can direct the public to it, where it has numbers, it has figures, it has context around this, because I think a lot of people are concerned by, unfortunately, with social media, especially these days, a lot of rumor and innuendo. And, we do face real challenges around staffing and around crime, but we need, and the public needs, context around that so that they can make their own decisions on how to interpret what's happening.
Madam President, Councilmember Johnson, transparency is of the utmost importance, and that's why we have a fully transparent dashboard where everybody can see the exact same numbers. There isn't a lack of clarity right now. It's exceedingly clear. The numbers are there for you to look at. We will share every single one of them with you. The piece is that you can't ignore the numbers. They're real. And the numbers, Councilmember, the numbers are the same, whether they're being reported from the MPD or through communications. There's no difference there. And in fact, if you want communications to confirm the numbers that the MPD has put out, we can do that as well. I believe the Chief Arredondo is going to get on in a second here, that he can perhaps further clarify.
Mr. Mayor, the numbers, to be fair though, the numbers around response time are not on the dashboard. We have on the dashboard. We're
presenting those numbers publicly for you right now, and if we can get those numbers on the dashboard, we certainly will.
Yeah, and we don't have staffing numbers on the dashboard either, and so these are some of the pieces. Even on shootings, we don't have a specific numbers for shootings. What we have is a crime map with shots fired on it, but we don't actually have those numbers related to, for instance, shootings on the MPD crime dashboard. It's not at that level of granularity.
Yeah, and our level of granularity matches almost any other city out there right now. We are constantly increasing transparency to make sure that we've got it, but there's not another city in the state of Minnesota that has this kind of both definition as well as specificity in the data that is publicly available. We need to continue to increase that transparency, and we will. I know Chief Arredondo is committed to it, but their numbers are different depending on who's stating them. The numbers are the numbers. And so reject the notion that there's some form of lack of clarity. I understand that at times, things have an uptick in crime. I understand that. We are seeing that right now. We're seeing it whether you want to acknowledge it or not.
And I absolutely acknowledge it, Mr. Mayor, that we are having crime increased in a number of categories. We're seeing a decrease in other categories, and overall violent crime is up. I make no disagreement about that, but I do believe when the narrative or the stories that the public is seeing is around gun violence, gunshots, that we have an obligation to actually put out the numbers and the data at that level on what are the numbers of gunshots. Clearly we have that data because it's being put on a map, but a map versus being able to compare it year over year over year is a different thing. And being able to put that in context, I think is really important. And having that as part of our dashboard, I think is really important. And when the conversation is around response times, when the conversation is around staffing levels, to have that data out there, I think is really critical, and not just in presentation form, but out on a dashboard. I think
so let's get it out on the dashboard
for the public
as well, but
to
there
get
were
this
some
information
data
out.
points.
And I think we have a responsibility to do that and to be more transparent. I don't want to just say we're doing as well of getting data out, or we're only getting as much data out as other departments. I want us to be as transparent as possible and to get even more data out. And so that's really my request. I'm not trying to, publicly shame anyone or anything like that. I'm just asking for more data because it does seem that there is some conflict in what we're hearing in terms of around response times, around capacity on response calls right now. And so I think the data will help clear that out.
So fair point. Let's get that data on the dashboard to the extent we are able to. I didn't read all of the data because I was trying to expedite it here, but let me go into each one of them because I agree we need to make sure that this is accurate. We need to make sure that we're all operating off the same data. So year to date, 2020 still has the highest shooting victim total in the last 5 years with 288 victims. The next closest is 2016 with 178. That's up 72%, 121 more victims compared to this time in 2019. The 2-year percentage change is 105%. That's 131 more victims compared to this time in 2018. Total of 32 victims of gunshot wounds in the past 2 weeks through Monday, July 27th. That is the data on those pieces. Additionally, there was a strategic analysis done over 3 time periods for response time analysis from 2019 and 2020 data. The most significant difference, as I mentioned, was in response times for priority 1 and priority 0 calls. That was an increase of 1.56 minutes from when a call was assigned to the first squad that was delivered. There's an additional 3.86 minute increase for that same time period for the average time when a call was entered into the queue and squad arrival. Those are the data points that we have on that front. If there are other data points, specific data points that are requested, we will happily get them to you. We want to be as transparent as possible. We need to be looking at the numbers here. And I think that none of us should be hiding from them. We should acknowledge the truth. Chief, are you on the line right now? Perhaps you can chime in.
And as we wait for Chief Arredondo, I just want to say I haven't heard any council member say anything about disputing the numbers, Mayor. I think they're just asking for clarifying questions because they're hearing different things when they call their precinct inspectors than what is being talked about publicly around staffing levels. So I think that was the question that Councilmember Schrader and Johnson were both asking, and also there's some notes about it in the chat.
Mm-hmm. I understand that the chief is on now, but I don't hear him.
Well,
Mr. Mayor, the chief is on the line. He's having difficulty unmuting his own phone. Chief, if you can hear me, I think your device may be muted. You're not muted within the system, but your device itself may be muted.
Madam Chair?
Yes, welcome, Chief. Thank you for being here.
Yes, my apologies about that. So if I could just respond to a couple of those. So one is that, as the mayor stated, those numbers are, excuse me, those numbers are correct. However, there's also going to be some things in terms of nuance that might relate to why some constituents perhaps maybe in terms of the response calls is that one of the things that's going to be very unique is why we are dealing with this uptick in crime, particularly the gun violence. Those calls are naturally going to draw more resources and oftentimes perhaps more resources from even different departments. So that in and of itself is going to perhaps at times some community members are going to feel that their calls are being slow to respond to when we have to, a shooting scene in and of itself can certainly draw in a lot of resources. And again, dispatch is going to have to reprioritize some of those calls. So that is one of the things. We are, as the council members had mentioned in speaking with their inspectors regarding comments that they've made about their staffing levels. I would certainly agree with those inspectors. I have made some intentional moves to look at certain units that we've had in the police department that were not traditionally 911 response calls and redeploying some of those units to make sure that we have the staffing that those precincts need to help in their day-to-day call loads. So I hope that also sheds some context to the question.
Thank you, Chief. I had put myself in queue just to say that I think it would be helpful. I know that our committee meetings are quite long, but I do think it would be helpful to have more of a robust report from you, Chief, at an upcoming POGO committee meeting, just so we can get some more of this detail about kind of how you're managing the shifts. So for example, it seems to me anecdotally, at least, that bar close is different now because so many bars are closed. And so, and we're seeing different patterns of criminal activity and violence around the city. So just to get some more of that context so that we can share it more accurately with our constituents, I think would be really helpful. We have Councilmember oh, yes, sorry, go ahead, Chief.
No, Madam Chair, I was just going to say absolutely.
Thank you. Councilmember Cunningham.
Thank you, Madam President, and thank you, Mayor and Chief. So I will say that the experience of my constituents does not align with those numbers. So I understand that you can't dispute the data and whatnot, but I will say that I have heard from an overwhelming amount of constituents in the 4th Ward who have not had a police response to gun violence. And I am hearing this because they're so frustrated by it. So, and it's at this point, it's not anomalous. Like, this is a very frequent complaint that I'm getting. Also, when people call the 4th Precinct to ask why it's taking so long, as well as other units that may come to specific scenes, they are telling my constituents that they should contact me so that I am hearing, so that essentially reading between the lines that it's my fault as a council member that they are not responding in a timely manner or at all. So this is also a frequent report back that I'm getting from my constituents. I think that's noteworthy, and I just want to make sure that we say that publicly so that it's not just something that I have to hold as an elected official, but for folks to understand that this is the dynamic that's also at play. I want to, we talk a lot about the uptick in violence, but we never talk about why. So I want to ask, why are we seeing this uptick in violence? Do we have an increased number of folks involved with gangs and cliques? Do we have gangs and cliques that have come from other cities that are particularly violent? Have we had, like, what is the underlying cause for this uptick in violence?
Madam President, Councilmember Cunningham, first, I agree with you. I agree with you that these are significant issues, and there are instances when response times are too long. We're in full agreement there. And I'll pass it to the chief, who can perhaps provide some more expertise into the reasons why. It's the confluence of so many different things right now. It's a global pandemic. It's the killing of George Floyd. It's the subsequent unrest. It's the economic downturn. It's unemployment. It's psychological factors. It's mental health and distress. It's a lack of housing opportunities. It is so many things that ultimately compound what we are seeing right now. And we know from history, as well as what's happening throughout the nation, that following instances of unrest, there often are upticks in crime and violence, historically speaking. I'll pass it to the chief, and perhaps he can provide a further analysis, but Councilmember, I agree with you.
Madam President, to Councilmember Cunningham, yeah, so as Mayor Fry had mentioned, it's what we're seeing here in Minneapolis is all of those things that he described that are certainly playing into this high uptick in violence. We are also seeing record number of guns out in our communities. We continue, we have for the past 5 years, we tend to recover more guns each and every year. I believe we will break last year's record in 2019. We're on pace to absolutely break that record. We have recently been making arrests where individuals are selling high velocity, high powered guns from their trunks of their cars. We obviously the task force that we are teamed up with that the U.S. Attorney's Office is also handling in terms of the prosecution of violent offenders. We're still making arrests in those cases as well. But it's a combination of everything. This year has been unique as some of the factors that the mayor have mentioned. When we have people in social conditions that are feeling stressed, feeling hopeless, these are all going to be underlying factors that will at times increase to the violence. And so we are doing our best, certainly, to try to prevent, mitigate. Councilmember Cunningham, your teams have been clearly over the last several years been helpful in trying to also help with getting folks some opportunities so that if they had been involved in groups to put down the guns, to get some social services. But clearly 2020 has created some dynamics that we had never experienced before in this city. But we're trying to do our best to prevent and mitigate those violent crimes from occurring.
Thank you. Madam President, if I may follow up.
Yes, thank you, Councilmember.
Thank you both so much for that. I think that it's really important for us to name the complexity of the underlying causes, right? And that it's going to take a multi-pronged approach to be able to address this. Really reiterating the point that, like, we can't just arrest our way out of it, right? Like, of course, we have to hold folks accountable who are causing harm, 100%. But we're also talking, I mean, housing instability came up, unemployment came up. Like, these are all additional factors that are outside the purview of the police department. And so I think that when we talk about public safety, we have to be cognizant of how are we addressing these underlying issues, as well as in addition to the immediacy of the guns being shot. So, I'm glad, that we have the task force, and that was brought up as a way that we are addressing this uptick in violence. I do have one follow-up question and then one last comment. So the task force was brought up. I'm curious about what else is being done to address the uptick in violence.
Madam President, Councilmember Cunningham, So the task force is one piece. Obviously, they are focused on more of the intelligence, and then federal prosecutions to holding those folks who are committing violence in our communities accountable. We also have a strategic group of investigators, folks who are out there in our communities who, through their intelligence, are going after those individuals who are committing the gun violence. They've been out there over the last several weeks. They've been when they were getting reports or following up on complaints from community members of gun violence. They're out there and they're making arrests. Matter of fact, I got reports from last night that they seized guns a couple of weeks ago. They seized over 25 guns throughout our city. So we've got that working as well. Combination of working with our community advocates who also who want to see and work with trying to reduce the violence in our communities. GVI, as you are fully aware of, Councilmember, that continues to play an important role in this year. So there's a lot of these things happening throughout our city, and we'll continue to work on that. Obviously, we're working with our other partners, both local, state, Hennepin County Probation Services, and others to try to address this. So there's a lot of different avenues that we're utilizing to help kind of work and resolve some of the violence that we're seeing.
Great, thank you. And then my last point that I would just like to make. Well, first I'll just say I appreciate the naming of what is being done. I do think it's helpful for us to know so that we can communicate that to our constituents. You know, obviously, like I'm working on a lot of things. This is, I mean, violence. There's just so much activity happening, even in the neighborhood that I live in, let alone the north side overall. And so, but being able to have, being able to be partnered together so that we can communicate to folks who are impacted, I think would be really helpful. So there's that. And then the last thing that I'll say is that, you know, we've been doing these reports for a while now, and they haven't said anything because, you know, it's just kind of like we got other things. But I just want to name that I am a little bit troubled that public safety doesn't include the Office of Violence Prevention, like getting updates about what they're doing and their role in this. When we talk about public safety, they are working around the clock in addition to and collaboration with MPD. And so I just think that when we get these report backs, I would like to be able to have for the public record and an understanding to be able to more clearly lay out what the Office of Violence Prevention's role is in public safety. That's why they exist. They're working around the clock. People call on them all of the time to be responding to this uptick in violence, for example. So I would just ask for consideration of including what the Office of Violence Prevention is doing during these times when discussing public safety. Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Chief.
Madam President, to Councilmember Cunningham, absolutely, and I should absolutely try to continue to uplift the wonderful work through Director Cotton, whether it's Mother's Love, whether it's Mad Dads, certainly Mr. Ferrome, all of his teams, and you're right, we absolutely call on them all the time. They have done so much tremendous, important work, and not only trying to mitigate the crime that we experience in our communities, but they've also turned lives around, and I can't say enough about that. And so while I am remiss, I did not say that here on the call, I will say that every opportunity I get, I do try to make sure that our communities know the great work that they do.
Thank you, Chief.
Thank you. Councilmember Schrader.
Thank you, Madam President. Mr. Mayor, in Chief, just had kind of some follow-up. I just really want to make sure the point is out there that my constituents are extremely frustrated with how public safety is going right now, and also they're just frustrated about how it's being talked about in the city. Like, I think we have the dashboard, like Mr. Mayor, no one is trying to say to not look at the numbers. I'm asking to look at the extra numbers, to not just talk about how bad the problem is. That has gotten out loud and clear. We've gotten a lot of emails about just the uptick in crime. People know about that. What they don't know about is what's being done about it. What are their, how are their tax dollars being used in one of the largest departments in the city to do that? I appreciate the chief. I appreciate the questions from Councilmember Cunningham. Like he said, I mean, it really helps for our constituents to know the specifics of what's going on, because so far the conversation really has flipped back to, well, we need more cops. And that is just such an unsatisfying answer. It may be part of the answer, but my constituents and we all need just so much more context around that. I mean, it's just like basically saying, well, if we had more snow plows, we'd be done plowing the snow quicker. Like, no kidding. That's exactly what would happen. But we need to know, how many officers we have, the number of arrests that are happening, how long are cases taking, is there an uptick, are things taking longer? That kind of specifics are what are going to help policymakers, make those decisions. It's going to inform constituents to understand what's really going on in the situation and how they can help. Because right now, with the data that's coming out, people are just scared, and they need to know what their city is doing to help out.
Madam President, Councilmember Schrader, so there were several questions there. I think it is fair to ask for specific answers. I also think it's fair to ask for specific questions. And so if we can get those specific questions, then we can answer them. One of them you just asked, is there an uptick? There is. One of them is, are things taking longer? They are. Not by a dramatic amount, but by I gave you the number of minutes just previously. There were a couple of other questions. You asked how many arrests are being made. Those numbers we can certainly get you. If there are other specifics that I missed, please ask. We want to give you the information, but there needs to be specific information that we're responding to. So are there other specifics, Councilmember, that we can answer for you?
Sure, I can mention them again. I mean, it's really around the context of what we're doing. Chief Rondo really mentioned a couple of them, the work of the task force, the work around the specific arrests around the carjackings, as well as the high power. A little bit more around the cases, if they're taking longer. Any data that's going to be able to show what MPD is doing, and what they are doing in response to this uptick in crime.
Okay, I just want to make sure I've got this. So carjackings we can easily get that information. That's no problem. You said how long the cases are taking to get responded to. I assume you mean to complete through an investigation?
That's correct.
Okay, so I don't know that offhand, the number of days that it takes to go through an investigation, but Chief, is that information that we have?
Madam President, to Councilmember Schrader, yes, we can give you basically a guideline of how long a certain case would take to, typically, for example, we could try to get an average in terms of a robbery case, for example, from the start of it being assigned to an investigator to it being presented to the county attorney's office. We could try to get you some timelines on what that looks like. We can also try to get some data as it relates to which I think is important. Our communities have expressed this certainly to me in the past. When when investigators have brought cases forward for charging, and even when the individual has been convicted, when they're released back, when they have recommitted for same or similar types of violent crime too. I think sometimes communities may have, even your constituents have expressed this to you, that they know of an individual in the community has caused harm recently. They thought the person was arrested, charged, and somehow they're back in the communities again. And we can try to give perhaps some context to what are some of the factors that goes into that as well.
Well, thank you, Chief Arredondo, and that's exactly it. I think it is not just these specific questions, but really being able to say to the public, here is what we are doing in response to the uptick in crime. Here's how we are assessing the problem. To get back to some other council members' questions, here's what we see as the cause, here's how we're addressing that cause, and here's how we're going to do that in the future to make sure that we reduce crime and to make sure that this summer gets better. So I think any data around that to be able to tell that story would be extremely helpful.
So let's get them as much data and information as possible. So I would request that and I don't have the ability to insist upon, obviously, but I would request that the council have a meeting where there's a presentation from the chief and probably our director, Kathy Hughes from 911, that can provide some additional information and answer any of the questions that you may have. I don't have all of it right now before my fingertips, but we want to make sure that you're able to ask specific questions and get specific answers to it.
Thank you, Mayor. I think that fits in with the conversation about having the chief at POGO as well. Although, I think what I hear my colleagues kind of observing is that, when the health department comes and talks about COVID, of course, they're talking about the problem that this pandemic is presenting to our community, but they're also presenting the solutions that they're bringing forward to help stem the spread of COVID. And, so you could go kind of department by department and talk about the different examples that we're kind of used to hearing about how we're tackling a particular problem in our community. So what I hear my colleagues observing and requesting is that kind of similar approach to these crimes, and particularly the violent crime that's happening, is just understanding, yes, the problem, but also hearing more about the solutions that we're pursuing as a city, knowing that they're complex and they take resources and they're interwoven with lots of different other issues that I think the chief has always, in his role, been very clear about, that MPD is always working with many other community partners and many other parts of the enterprise to work to keep people safe. So I hear my colleagues asking for more information about those measures that we're taking to support and provide safety for the residents of our city. Councilmember Reich.
Thank you, Madam President. And just maybe a question that can be answered now or explored for later conversation. And I think it plays off of what Councilmember Cunningham was talking about, reinforcing that we have a multi-faceted problem. We need to have a multifaceted approach, both external to the department and, of course, internal. And on that point, I think raising our partnership that we have out there doing very impactful interventions through our Office of Crime Prevention. But we also have more internal to MPD, some things that are playing into our ability to keep our staffing levels up for 3 shifts of patrols. As we backfill to keep the level numbers, and of course level numbers based on past years in the face of increasing crime statistics and activity out there. I think we should have some contemplation and maybe some thinking that's presently happening in terms of trade-offs. So if we have beat officers that do a unique sort of approach within the community in the name of crime prevention, shifting into patrol, CERT teams shifting into patrol, all to keep numbers flat, there must be some kind of impact that would incur, assuming that those interventions and tactics and personnel trained to do specific things would be not part of the mix, as it were. So maybe there's a comment that could happen now, but certainly as we move forward, trying to manage staff levels and crime levels and that interface between those two numbers, to think about these other interventions that we've developed over the years that have very specific impacts that I think are important to the overall mix, and to just understand those trade-offs. So I leave that open. There might be a comment from the chief for now, but certainly that could be a conversation moving forward. And thank you, Madam President and Mr. Mayor.
Madam President, to Councilmember Wright, thank you for your question. So one of the things that I'm certainly making sure that's very deliberate when I look at placing some of those units, the traditional 911 response units, back into those precincts, is trying to do my best to keep a complement, or at least a core complement, of the of that personnel and that talent and skill set, particularly from the leadership, so that that is still retained there. And there's nothing that doesn't prevent the precinct inspectors that certainly if their supervisors have that staffing level within that shift, for example, to even conduct details with certain officers on that shift to still do some of that same or similar type of work that had occurred. So just an example, for if 4th Precinct, or in your case, 2nd Precinct CERT, had members that were still associated with the shift, if there's enough staff that day, they could still certainly, if they have intelligence or information about other types of crimes that are occurring, to create a detail right within that shift. And so we're making sure that our inspectors also have they can still be flexible and innovative in terms of still utilizing the talents and skill sets of those individuals who may have served on different units.
Thank you, Chief. Council Vice President Jenkins.
Thank you, Madam President. And this is for Chief Arredondo. I am hearing from my constituents, and I see that the mayor has 38th in Chicago on his public safety report, which we have not heard yet, but particularly in this area, people are saying that they're not experiencing slow response. They're experiencing no response. They're being told that this is called a no-go zone by MPD. When they call the police, or when there is an emergency help situation, that they have to meet with the officers blocks away from where the incident is occurring, that police are not responding to their calls at all. And I can't believe it, but I'm hearing it so often that it's gotta be true. It's coming from so many different places. So what can we do to pull this area back into the city process, that they deserve the same level of service that everybody else gets, at minimum a slow response, but we should be having responses to the crime, the violence, the concerns of our residents equally throughout the city. And having this be a no-go zone is just completely unacceptable. So how do we negotiate with the community? How do we come together and plan that this is no longer a reality, that this is a no-go zone?
Madam President, to Council Vice President Jenkins. So I think a couple of things. So one is, I think it would be very important, because I've heard today, I think it was mentioned before by a council member about communities' belief and understanding that when officers are dispatched to a 911 call, that officers just are not showing up. And so I know that there is a practice and protocol in place that officers have to respond to those calls, and if they're not, that has to be, and if why they don't respond, that has to be documented through NBCC. So I think it would be for transparency for our community members, obviously for elected officials, if Director Hughes could provide more context to that, if they've got data that shows a call was placed and MPD officers just flat out refuse to respond. And so I'd like to know that as well. So I think that that would be important to have. Specific also to the geographical location we're talking to, I know that in and around that intersection, when a violent incident had occurred, that in order for officers to try to safely get in there, that there had been some communication if they could meet the individual right outside of the barriers. I know there's a couple of incidents where that occurred. I haven't heard of that happening anytime more recently. I know that the 3rd Precinct officers responded very quickly in order to try to save the life. It was right around 37th and LA. It is for Chicago as well. But no, this is important information. But I do believe that through MECC we might be able to get that specific data about if officers are not responding to 911 calls. But I have not, again, I have not heard from MECC that says that we dispatch calls to your officers and they just refuse to show. And so, but again, I think having that data would be important.
Should that data should exist within 911 then, right?
Absolutely.
Can we, if Ms. Hughes is on the call, can we get those data reports so that we can determine what's going on, and whether or not it is happening? It's perceived to be happening, and so I believe that we need to have some conversations that involve MPD administration, including yourself, Chief, with community members to discuss these issues. As has already been noted on this call, we need to have regular updated reports to our committees so that we can have a better understanding and a better handle on these situations. So I'm hoping that that is going to become a part of our process. And I see that there are a couple of other people who want to respond to the 911 data.
Yes, thank you, Council Vice President. Mr. Ruff has volunteered to respond to the 911 question, our coordinator.
Sure. Council President Bender, Council Vice President, as we've discussed previously, I think if there are specific situations where you have questions about 911 calls, then we are happy to work with Director Hughes and have in the past on addressing those specific questions or concerns about a 911 call. I think as the chief mentioned earlier and as the mayor mentioned earlier, if you are interested in general statistics, which also exist for MECC and with the police department, then I think direction on what those statistics are could be brought to a POGO meeting as we discussed previously. So I will use one example that highlights some of the refinement that's necessary. I think certainly there have been 911 calls where individuals report gunfire in their neighborhood and are asking for MPD to show up to their house when there is gunfire in their neighborhood, and the response back is, unless you see gunfire and individuals who are impacted by that gunfire in front of your house, we're not going to respond to your house, but we are responding to the gunfire. And so sometimes residents will interpret that as that MPD is not responding, when in fact they are responding to the incident, but just not to that particular address. And so that's an example of some of the frustration and understandable frustration that we hear from residents, but those are the types of calls where if there are specific cases, we can certainly go back, look at those cases and show how the response was occurring at that point in time.
Madam Chair, if I may, Mr. Ruff, many times people are calling 911 because the bullets are in their house. And so they may not, the perpetrators may not be directly in front of their house, but the gunshots are putting holes in their dining rooms, in their bedrooms, in their bathrooms. And so I'm not sure why the police would not show up at their house. Like, that doesn't comport to me.
All right, thank you, Council Vice President. Mr. Ruff, it does seem like we need to do some follow-up on a number of issues regarding 911, but also more generally here with the questions that have gone to the mayor and Chief Arredondo. I think I'm hearing a lot of different scenarios that are being described by council members, all of which probably need separate and different kinds of follow-up. Mr. Ruff, I don't know if you have any final thoughts, or we can leave it for.
Summary is a fair summary, and just want you to know that these situations are utmost concern for staff throughout the enterprise, and so we will provide not only information but our best efforts around the response.
It seems to me too, I'm hearing some anecdotal comments about things that our constituents are hearing when they call 911 that are, I think, cause for concern. And I think none of us like to share anecdotal information because we don't want to extrapolate from, a few conversations we've had. But I'm starting to hear more and more from my own constituents, but I think also in other wards, folks are hearing some version of we're not coming to respond to a 911 call for various reasons. And so I think that is troubling and contributing to the concern around, this sort of general question of what's going on here, which is, if folks are calling 911 and hearing we're not sending anyone to help you, that's just a concerning development. And so I think it's, again, contributing to the sort of general kinds of questions that we're hearing today. So I think there's a need to understand more about the staffing issues. There's a need to understand how the different patterns of activity in our city are shifting, less bar time activity, more daytime activity potentially, and how we're adjusting to that. And if there are any barriers that we need to address together to adjust those things, our responses, how the coordination is going between 911 and MPD and the Office of Violence Prevention and others in the city. So it sounds like there's a lot of follow-up to do. And I think, again, the overall theme I'm hearing is just needing to have more of an update during this time in these presentations about not just what's happening that's concerning, but what we're doing to address these concerning patterns. Okay, I don't see anyone else in queue. Would anyone else like to ask a question or comment? I don't see anyone. So, Mr. Mayor, I think we're set to continue.
Thank you, Madam President. And I do think it would be really helpful to get a full, in-depth analysis and presentation in one of these committees. We've provided sort of varying levels and varying amounts of information on public safety in these specific presentations. I think public safety is certainly tangentially related to COVID-19, but it's not COVID-19 direct. And so the information we've provided obviously is not comprehensive in this. We are happy to provide that comprehensive information there, and I think transparency is the best mode right now. And so let's make sure we get that out. And to the extent there are any specific questions, please ask. We will get that information. With regard to fire, the department responded to several structure fires over the last 2 weeks, and they successfully conducted 2 technical rescues along the riverbanks of the Mississippi. The department and the city reached agreement on a letter of agreement with the IAFF Local 82 regarding furloughs to address the amended 2020 budget as well. And we appreciate their partnership. For state and federal activity, there is a lot of information here. I might skip some things, but I'm happy to go back and answer additional questions. The second special session of the Minnesota Legislature adjourned early morning last Tuesday, while the House and Senate were able to agree upon a public safety reform bill. A bonding and tax bill were not able to make it out of the special session. IGR anticipates that these actions to be raised at the third special session, which is slated for August, as the governor must renew his emergency powers every 30 days. A specific date has not yet been determined. As for the federal update, Monday evening, the United States Senate leadership released their draft plan for a COVID-19 stimulus, which would be part 4. The draft plan, which is titled the HEALS Act, provides $1 trillion in relief funding but was released as separate bills. This gives Congress the option of passing pieces as opposed to a singular package. The Senate will now begin the formal negotiations with the House, which released and passed their own $3.5 trillion relief plan, the HEROES Act, which was back in May. And the Senate does not include additional funding for state and local governments again. The House passed the HEROES Act, which included $500 billion for states and $375 billion for local governments. And while new funds are not included in the state Senate proposal, excuse me, not the state, the federal Senate proposal, the bill would expand the allowable use of the CARES Act's Coronavirus Relief Fund by extending funds for use beyond the end of 2020 to 90 days after the end of the state or locality's fiscal year 2021 date. I'm going to skip forward to the gap funding package now. For housing, community prevention partners, MPHA, and city and county staff continue to work through the list that we've had to complete the full verification and approval process for each applicant that is signing up for that emergency rental relief. And as of Wednesday, July 28th, 605 applicants have been approved, totaling $860,000 in emergency assistance payments. We are additionally getting the remainder amount of money out as well. As for the forgivable loan program, as reported the last time we met, the small business forgivable loans have been fully awarded. Value of $1.5 million was awarded to 173 small businesses. As for recovery, the Minneapolis Forward Community Now Coalition has created their first set of solutions, strategies, and tactics. And I'll go through each of the four main ones. First is land acquisition to help current business owners become owners of their property. Developing business advocates to work with individual business owners throughout the recovery and rebuilding process, from insurance claims to ultimately reopening their doors. Third is the creation of new funding pools that prioritize entrepreneurs and BIPOC-owned businesses across the city. And then finally, additional lobbying support to deeply support our business community and leverage the interest of people on both sides of the aisle. So right now, we're actively fundraising. I'm making quite a few calls to support these community-generated solutions that prevent gentrification, prioritize business retention, and will restore our built environment while fundamentally transforming the way that our city does business in an equitable way. Additionally, this week is the first week where our neighbors on unemployment will no longer receive that additional $600 weekly allocation from the federal government, and we know that's going to be a substantial hit. As we see the inevitable ebb and flow of our businesses, our Minneapolis employment training team continues to evolve their work to make sure that young people are deepening skills and our workers can find new opportunities, and our businesses that are open have the opportunity to meet their talent needs. So I'm going to stop there. Thank you all for the partnership. I'm happy to answer any additional questions.
Are there any further questions or comments on this section of our agenda? Seeing none, thank you, Mayor, for coming to our meeting today. We appreciate the updates and answers to the questions. And without objection, I will direct the clerk to file this report.
Thank you, Madam President. Thank you, Council.
Thank you, Thank you, Mayor. That concludes that item. So the next item we have is the Council's resolution ratifying the existing local public health emergency, with an updated draft that includes the amendments the Mayor described just now in his report. I'll ask the clerk to speak to this item.
Madam President, as we've done so often in the past, the resolution that was previously adopted by Council that extends and confirms those emergency regulations throughout the duration of the declared emergency period is periodically updated by the Council so that they all continue to move forward as a package of emergency regulations that continue in force and effect. So today's action is essentially following the same actions we've taken previously so that we can add the latest emergency regulation issued by the Mayor on July 29th regarding bar areas to that resolution adopted by Council that will continue to then extend the life of that resolution through the declared emergency period.
Thank you, Mr. Carl. Are there any questions or comments on this item? Seeing none, is there a motion to approve this resolution, which would ratify the existing emergency and include those amendments.
Move approval.
So moved. Second.
Thank you. Clerk will call the roll.
Councilmember Gordon.
Aye.
Councilmember Kano.
Aye.
Councilmember Reich.
Aye.
Councilmember Fletcher.
Aye.
Councilmember Schrader.
Aye.
Councilmember Cunningham.
Aye.
Councilmember Ellison.
Aye.
Councilmember Goodman.
Aye.
Councilmember Johnson.
Aye.
Councilmember Palmisano.
Aye.
Vice President Jenkins.
Aye.
President Bender.
Aye.
There are 12 ayes.
That carries, and that is adopted. Next, we have the reports of our standing committees. The first is from our Business Inspections and Zoning Committee, given by the Chair, Councilmember Goodman.
Thank you, Madam President. The Business Inspections and Zoning Committee is bringing forward 11 items for approval this morning. Item number 1 is the Certificate of Appropriateness and Historic Variance Appeals by Michael Rattle and Robert Van Nelson. The committee voted to deny the appeal. Item number 2 is a conditional use variance and site plan approval appeal on behalf of the South Uptown Neighborhood Association and Max Ellis. The committee voted to deny that appeal. Item number 3 is looks like it's the rezoning regarding that. Item number 4 is the local historic designation for the Lyndhurst Residential Historic District. The committee voted to approve that. Item 5 is a rezoning at 2911 Grand Street Northeast. Item 6 is a rezoning at 2641 Fremont Avenue South. Item 7 is a rezoning at 1127 4th Street Southeast and 411 12th Avenue Southeast. Item number 8 is a rezoning at 1820 Girard Avenue South. Item 9 is a rezoning at 3136 Minnehaha Avenue. Item number 10 is an alley vacation for Olson Housing at 461 Girard Terrace. And item number 11 is a rezoning from an earlier item at 3501 and 3525 Hennepin Avenue. With that, Madam Chair, I will move all items for approval this morning.
Councilmember Goodman has moved the committee report. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, clerk will call the roll.
Councilmember Gordon.
Aye.
Councilmember Kano.
Aye.
Councilmember Reich.
Aye.
Councilmember Fletcher.
Aye.
Councilmember Schrader.
Aye.
Councilmember Cunningham.
Aye.
Councilmember Ellison.
Aye.
Councilmember Goodman.
Aye.
Councilmember Johnson.
Aye.
Councilmember Palmisano.
Aye.
Vice President Jenkins.
Aye.
President Bender.
Aye.
There are 12 ayes.
That carries, and that report is adopted. Next, we have the report from the Policy and Government Oversight Committee, given by the Vice President, Councilmember Jenkins.
Thank you, Madam President. I believe our last Policy Government Oversight Committee meeting was one of our longest ones to date. And so we are bringing 41 items forward today. And I will try to be brief as possible. Item number 1 is the Freelance Worker Protection Ordinance. Items number 1 and 2 approve separate legal settlements that are on our agenda. Item number 4 authorizes the city attorney to join with other local governments in filing an amicus brief in the Fulton v. City of Minneapolis case before the United States Supreme Court. Item number 5 accepts a COVID-19 response grant from the Women's Foundation. Item number 6 authorizes a no-cost joint use agreement with Substance Church for shared use of a surface parking lot adjacent to the church and the convention center. Item number 7 authorizes a contract amendment with Restoration and Construction Services for the work required on 3rd Avenue ramp repair project. Item number 8 authorizes a contract amendment with Messinger Construction Company for work required on the Command Center relocation project. And number 9 is a resolution approving the Hennepin County Housing and Redevelopment Authority to provide financial assistance to the 2020 Affordable Housing Incentive Fund for 8 projects. Item number 10 accepts donations to the city valued under $15,000 for the second quarter of 2020. Item number 11 authorizes the MBC to utilize the best value contracting award process for phase 1 of City Hall office space improvements. Item number 12 authorizes the contract with Colliers International for bond underwriting services. Item number 13 is a resolution reapproving and extending prior bond issuance authorizations and project appropriations for fire stations number 1 and number 11. Items number 14 through 20 are all contracts with various companies for work that is all associated with the public service building project. Full details are on our agenda. Item number 21 is the acceptance of a state grant for COVID-19 testing. Item number 22 is the acceptance of a state grant for COVID-19 emergency response to assist homeless service providers. Item number 23 authorizes a no-cost agreement with the University of Minnesota Regents for medial center residency program. Item number 24, authorizes a 5-year license agreement with the Metropolitan Council for the Metro Pass program. Item number 25 authorizes a series of contracts which all pertain to the 2021 Minneapolis Fund. Item number 26 accepts the donations from the New American Economy for Technical Research for a report entitled New Americans in Minneapolis. Item number 27 cancels the designation of the 2020 alley renovation program. Item number 28 authorizes downtown business improvement service districts to use its budget reserves for the 2021 operating plan and budget. Item number 29 authorizes a cooperative agreement with Hennepin County for the President's Bicycle Boulevard project. Item number 30 is a contract amendment with the Minnesota Department of Transportation for the I-35W and Lake Street Transit Access Project. Item number 31 is a contract amendment with Meyer Contracting for additional project work and costs associated with the Mid-City Industrial Reconstruction Project. Item number 32 is a contract amendment with Corval Constructors for the Fridley Softening Plant Heating, Ventilation, and Air Conditioning Renovation Project. Item number 33 is a contract amendment with the St. Paul Board of Water Commissioners to govern an additional connection point between the water distribution centers. Items number 34 through 37 are bid acceptance for various projects which are detailed again on our agenda. Items number 38 through 40 considers various actions related to the grant funding and CDBG reprogramming with the 2020 Consolidated Action Plan. Item number 41 is a staff direction related to the Aquifer Thermal Energy Storage System in the Towerside Innovation District. And I move approval of all 41 items, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Council Vice President has moved the committee report. Is there any discussion on those items? I don't see any. I will just briefly highlight that the freelance workers ordinance that has been brought forward today as a follow-up to the wage theft ordinance, I think is really significant, and I want to pause and thank the council members, Councilmember Fletcher and Cunningham and Palmisano, who worked on that ordinance. I know we have so much going on, but I think, making sure that our workers are protected across the board, no matter what, arrangement they have with their employer, contract or otherwise, is so important now more than ever, and just appreciate how much effort you put into that, along with the staff that prepared the ordinance. We have one comment from CPED, which has now been answered in the chat. So thank you. There was just a little question about one of the items that was carried over from the last council meeting. And now we do have Councilmember Palmisano in queue.
Thank you, Madam President. I just wanted to say, I know that myself and Councilmember Fletcher and Cunningham made a lot of comments in the POGO meeting before the ordinance's public hearing, but thank you for recognizing this piece of work. This accompaniment to our wage theft ordinance is an important one, and you'll be hearing more from us going forward. It is not effective until January 1st of next year, so there's a lot of time to work on education. We have a really nice frequently asked questions document, and please reach out to any of our offices if we can share that with you, perhaps for an upcoming newsletter. So thank you.
Thank you. I'm just checking to see if there's any other council members in queue. I don't see anyone. So the clerk will call the roll.
Councilmember Gordon.
Aye.
Councilmember Cano.
Aye.
Councilmember Reich.
Aye.
Councilmember Fletcher.
Aye.
Councilmember Schrader.
Aye.
Councilmember Cunningham.
Aye.
Councilmember Ellison.
Aye.
Councilmember Goodman.
No on item 41, aye on the remainder.
Councilmember Johnson.
Aye.
Councilmember Palmisano.
No on item 41 and aye on the remainder.
Vice President Jenkins.
Aye.
President Bender.
Aye.
There are 12 ayes on the report except for item number 41, which has 10 ayes and 2 nays.
Thank you. Those items carry, and that report is complete. The next order of business is the notice of ordinance introductions. And we have 2 notices. The first is a notice by Councilmember Fletcher to introduce at the next regular council meeting the subject matter of an ordinance amending the zoning code to establish regulations for short-term rental units. And second, by Councilmember Gordon to introduce at the next regular council meeting the subject matter of an ordinance amending the zoning code related to the amended standards for the University Area Overlay District. Are there any questions or comments on either of those notices? Seeing none, those notices are given and no further action is required at this time. Next, we have the honorary resolution that was added to the agenda as amended, and I will turn it over to Council Vice President Jenkins and Councilmember Ellison to introduce this item.
Thank you so much, Madam President and colleagues. The resolution today is being presented to recognize and honor the 55th anniversary of the Voting Rights Act. It is a recognition that is being offered by city councils throughout the country. I think it's really important, particularly in light of the passing of Congressman John Lewis, whose life's work was all around ensuring that every American in this country exercises their inalienable right to vote. Also, we are at a moment in time where we are seeing so many efforts to suppress and or downright deny people's opportunities and rights to vote. And so we want to lift this up as honoring the work of the voter rights amendment, but also to encourage people that we must be on the front lines of voting. If we are protesting for change in our communities, our protests fall short if we are not following that up with showing up at the polls and at the voters booth. And I will turn it over to Councilmember Ellison to talk about some of the ways that Minneapolis is ensuring that all of our residents are able to vote.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. I'm honored to be bringing this forward with you, both for the reasons that you described and also because I've had my own story about getting to know Congressman John Lewis, which really involved us talking at length about comic books and Watchmen specifically, and I just will never forget that moment as a young aspiring comic book artist talking to the civil rights legend who seemed larger than life to me, but in that moment I realized, just how regular of a person he was. We liked the same books. We both talked about comics, and it sat with me that it is not, sort of giants that cause massive change in our country, but it is regular people who do incredible things. And I think that this is an honor of that, of regular people coming together to do incredible things. I know in Minneapolis, we are committed to making sure that everyone has access to their right to vote. I know that with the coronavirus that has become extremely difficult, but I think that we have our elections team to thank for being in a position to get everyone access, giving everyone access to vote. We're going to be doing everything we can to promote and have started to promote voting by mail, which I know has come under attack by some, but I think is an extremely safe and legitimate way of voting. And for folks who are going to plan to go voting in person, developing ways to make sure that booths are sanitized, that staff are kept safe, that election judges are kept safe, is absolutely, that voters are kept safe, is going to be top of mind, because we allow anything to impede the rights of people to vote. As the Council Vice President said, without this tool is the centerpiece of our democracy. In the city of Minneapolis, we plan on not allowing anything to stand in the way of us delivering that to you. And so it's with that I want to thank our staff, thank our elections team, thank our election judges, and thank you, Council Vice President, for bringing this forward and allowing me to co-author this with you.
Yeah, thank you, Councilmember Ellison, and I will just comment that you looked very, very young in your photo, Congressman John Lewis. I was quite taken aback by that photo, but it really is. This resolution, while honorary, is really symbolic of the progress that is made through protests, through electoral participation, as well as just committed long-term advocacy, and that is what it takes to change this country that we all so love. I applaud the historic efforts that so many in our community and so many people all around the world and throughout this country are taking right now, in taking to the streets and bringing attention to these long-term systemic issues that have been plaguing our society for decades and for centuries, in fact. And certainly that has brought about change. Those protests have elicited change within our own body and our own system of governance here in the city of Minneapolis, but those efforts continue to fall short if we don't show up at the polls to make our voices heard. And so this is a plea to help honor the legacy of John Lewis and so many others who have fought on the battle lines for our full rights to vote, that we must show up to the polls on August 11th, November 3rd, next year when all of us will likely be on the ballot. We need everybody to show up to the polls then and throughout all of the history of our country. And so thank you, colleagues. I encourage you to support this resolution, and yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you, Council Vice President. Councilmember Cunningham.
Thank you, Madam President, and thank you to the two authors for bringing this forward. I just want to make sure that I take a moment to say thank you to my ancestors and elders who fought, and some died, many died, in the pursuit of the ability for me to not only be able to vote as a Black American, but to also be able to hold office as a Black American. I'm very grateful for the space for us to be able to do this and honor the legacy of Congressman John Lewis, who went from being an elder to joining the ancestors. And so, so thank you so much. As a descendant of slaves and sharecroppers, and the son of someone who was a part of the Great Migration to the North after desegregation, I am so grateful for all of those who paved the path for me to be able to be where I'm at today as an elected official, and definitely echo the call for folks to come out and vote and honor those legacies of the elders and ancestors who made this possible. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further discussion on the resolution? Seeing none, clerk, please call the roll.
Councilmember Gordon.
Aye.
Councilmember Cano.
Aye.
Councilmember Reich.
Aye.
Councilmember Fletcher.
Aye.
Councilmember Schrader.
Aye.
Councilmember Cunningham.
Aye.
Councilmember Ellison.
Aye.
Councilmember Goodman.
Aye.
Councilmember Johnson.
Aye.
Councilmember Palmisano.
Aye.
Vice President Jenkins.
Aye.
President Bender.
Aye.
There are 12 ayes.
That carries and the resolution is adopted. Next is the introduction and referral calendar, and we have one item this morning. Pursuant to notice, Councilmember Palmisano moves to introduce, give first reading to, and refer to the Policy and Government Oversight Committee an ordinance related to personnel that amends section 20.360 of the Code of Ordinances to ease restrictions for furloughs immediately before or after paid holidays. Is there any discussion on that introduction? Seeing none, clerk will call the roll on the approval of that introduction and referral.
Councilmember Gordon.
Aye.
Councilmember Cano.
Aye.
Councilmember Reich.
Aye.
Councilmember Fletcher.
Aye.
Councilmember Schrader.
Aye.
Councilmember Cunningham.
Aye.
Councilmember Ellison.
Aye.
Councilmember Goodman,
Aye.
Councilmember Johnson,
Aye.
Councilmember Palmisano,
Aye.
Vice President Jenkins,
Aye.
President Bender.
Aye.
There are 12 ayes.
That carries and will be referred to the POGO committee in the next cycle. The next order is unfinished business, and we have one item for consideration, which actually, let's see. Actually, there are two items related to each other. So the first item is consideration of a series of amendments and guidelines to the Minneapolis Homes home ownership projects in order to align it with the Minneapolis 2040 Comprehensive Plan. The full scope of the changes that have been proposed are detailed on the agenda, and we had a lengthy discussion on this item and presentation 2 cycles ago at the POGO committee. Is there any discussion on this item? Councilmember Cunningham.
Thank you, Madam President. I just want to take the time to thank CPED staff for meeting with me to talk in more detail about how this will be implemented and how it will affect my constituents in the 4th Ward. So this item and the next item are both significant changes, and they've put a lot of time and consideration and expertise into it for us to have as a city to have accumulated as much land as we have was under unfortunate circumstances. The foreclosure crisis followed by a large amount of homes being razed, and then the tornado. So the city ended up accumulating quite a lot of land under those unfortunate circumstances. However, that becomes an asset then for us to be able to leverage for community wealth building now, later down the road, now that we have that land. And so it was very important to me as a council member to respond to the concerns that I share with my constituents to ensure that we really are leveraging this asset that's rare. Public land in cities is increasingly rare. And so to be able to leverage that for community wealth building and housing stabilization. So I want to thank Roxanne Kimball, Andrea Brennan, Erica Coleman, and Alfred Portrick for coming to meet with me, or virtually meeting with me to dig into those details even further. The next item around perpetual housing, I really appreciate the equity lens on that focuses both on the ability to find that balance between ensuring that we have accessible homeownership, given the fact that we know that a huge portion of racial disparities between white and Black folks that we see, the wealth disparity is due to lack of access to homeownership. So there's that, as well as the wealth building opportunity that comes from that. So being able to find that balance, I think, is incredibly challenging and something that, we've struggled with in the housing crisis and in racial disparities in homeownership and wealth. And so I just want to say thank you so much to the CPED staff who have worked on this, who have been strategic about it, and I look forward to continuing to work with them to ensure that the land and the vacant homes that are available are put to the best use possible for Northsiders. Thank you.
Thank you, Council Member, and thanks for the care that you put into this important decision as we refocus the resources and both of land and staff time in these 2 important programs. Maybe I'll go ahead and take both of the items up together since they are so related. So that would be item 2 as well, under unfinished business, which is consideration of amendments and guidelines to the perpetually affordable home ownership land trust housing model. And that is also detailed in the agenda. So I'll take up items 1 and 2 under unfinished business. Is there any further discussion on these items? I will move approval. and ask the clerk to call the roll.
Councilmember Gordon.
Aye.
Councilmember Cano. Councilmember Reich.
Aye.
Councilmember Fletcher.
Aye.
Councilmember Schrader.
Aye.
Councilmember Cunningham.
Aye.
Councilmember Ellison.
Aye.
Councilmember Goodman.
Aye.
Councilmember Johnson.
Aye.
Councilmember Palmisano.
Aye.
Councilmember Cano.
Aye.
Vice President Jenkins.
Aye.
President Bender.
Aye.
There are 12 ayes.
That carries, and those items are approved as recommended by staff. That concludes the items on our agenda. We have next the order of announcements. Are there any announcements from council members? I don't see any, so we will move to the very last item of our agenda, which is adjournment. Typically very straightforward, but today we have some more detail that Mr. Clerk had emailed yesterday to council members. So we've completed all of our business on today's agenda. We'll have a motion to adjourn this meeting to Monday, August 10th at 10 a.m., at which time we would be prepared to receive any report by the Policy and Government Oversight Committee on its report and recommendation on the proposed charter amendment related to the creation of a new Department of Community Safety and Violence Prevention. In order to continue working within the statutory deadline for submitting a potential ballot question to voters, this motion would need to include several components. First, the motion suspends Rule 6, Section 7.a of the City Council's own Rules of Order to direct the POGO Committee to refer any report from the Charter Commission to the first available meeting of the City Council following the committee's work. Second, the motion adjourns this meeting of the City Council to 10 a.m. on Monday, August 10th, so that we are ready to receive a recommendation from our POGO Committee on the potential for a ballot question if it should be available to us. And third, it sets a public hearing on that proposal should the matter be referred to us to occur at that adjourned meeting on Monday, August 10th at 10 a.m. and directs the clerk to provide the proper notice of that hearing, including opening the ability for the community to register to speak at that public hearing. Is there any discussion on that motion? Councilmember Palmisano.
Thank you, Madam President. I'm curious, is it the expectation then, sorry, there's something happening outside my window here. Is it the expectation then that after the hearing, we would then vote to put this item on the ballot without any other kinds of public process or engagement? Is that the timeline here? It's a question for the clerk or anybody, or any of the authors, I guess I would say.
Yes, thank you, Councilmember Palmisano. I can defer to the clerk for the procedural questions. The Charter Commission has held a number of public hearings on both the City Council recommended language as well as their various proposals for alternative language. So those are available if council members haven't had a chance to listen to them. Those are all available online for listening, and they've had many hours of public testimony, including a special meeting that they had to add for overflow of folks who had signed up for the previously scheduled hearings. So this, maybe I will actually defer to the clerk to go through the particular dates and timelines so that I don't miss anything if I try. But basically, yes, this would be creating a public City Council meeting within the time frame to still have this question go to the ballot for voters in the 2020 election if and when the Charter Commission forwards it to the City Council.
Madam President, the only additional piece I think would respond to the council member's question specifically is it the council's intention to take a final vote following its public hearing at the adjourned meeting on August 10th, Monday, August 10th at 10 a.m. And the question, of course, is a matter for the council as a body to consider. It would at that point be proper for a motion to be introduced following the public hearing to dispose of that item in final form. I will remind the council that because of the shortened timeline that was available to us to consider a ballot question. The process under which this item moves forward has already been defined. So as the president indicated, the current language of the ordinance proposing a ballot question rests with the Charter Commission. The Charter Commission is moving very quickly to see what its recommendation on that proposal will be. We have told them we need an answer by its regular meeting on August 5th, which is next week. Assuming that they submit a recommendation, then that recommendation comes back to the POGO committee the next day on August 6th. The POGO committee would then formulate its own recommendation on the question to submit to the city council. This motion before us authorizes the POGO committee to submit its recommendation to that now adjourned meeting that's being proposed on Monday, August 10th, so that we can further expedite the process. However, there can be no further changes to the language of that ordinance. And it cannot be further adjusted. Once it comes back to the council and after the council conducts its public hearing, which is being proposed as part of this motion, it would be proper for the council at that time to take up and consider a motion on what to do with the question, to submit the ballot question. If an alternative is submitted by the Charter Commission, it would be proper for the council to consider that substitute or to decide not to submit a question. But those three options are available to the council at its adjourned meeting on Monday the 10th. I hope I answered that question.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Clerk.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And that really was my question to the authors is the intent then on August 10th to then vote to put this on the ballot? But just, and I guess that's an open question that I would invite others to weigh in on, but just if to finish, I do just have some concerns about the process here and the process that's before you on our screen. We haven't had any public engagement. We have put that all on the Charter Commission, and I've watched those meetings. I see that it looks like they're doing their best, but I just want to express concern. I don't want to be obstructionist here, but I want to express great concern that we've waived our rules. We've created an expedited process on something huge and controversial without a lot of education opportunities for the public. I've held 6 ward forums in which there's a lot of interest in this topic. There's a lot of momentum in this topic, but there is a lot of confusion as to what this topic is. And I hear that over and over around the city. And so it concerns me that we're raising up all of the gates here to make sure that this very fast process could go even faster. We're waiving our own rules here after bringing it late, and now we're going to expedite it again on our own fast track procedures. And I am very concerned that we've thrown out all of our own public opportunities for engagement. So I hope that if this is the intent to put the vote to the voters on August 10th, that we are immediately going into working on trying to educate the public more about this, because we've never done something this fast before. So I have 2 buckets of concerns, process and substance, but here are the process ones that I'm concerned about. So I will be voting for this despite my objection and concern that we are moving too fast, and I hope that we can correct it as we go forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Council Vice President Jenkins.
Thank you, Madam President. Thank you so much. I am personally unable to support this action this morning. While I do agree that the initial proposal to change the charter in an effort to achieve significant, sustainable, and meaningful change as we work towards developing a public safety continuum that keeps everybody in our community safe, I'm opposed to shenanigans in order for us to get there. We have a system of checks and balances for a reason. And that reason, in my opinion, is to ensure deliberation and thoughtful consideration of the decisions that this body makes on behalf of its residents. The Charter Commission has a role in the checks and balances. and being appointed by a Hennepin County judge, they can be considered the judicial branch. Clearly, the mayor represents the executive branch and the city council, the legislative branch. I've heard from many African Americans in this community that are opposed to amending the Minneapolis charter at all. Some feel it's a step too far. Some feel like it hasn't been enough community engagement. Some are adamant that there must be a plan in place. I believe that if the proposal is made it to the ballot and subsequently passed, that those concerns would be addressed. However, I do believe that we must allow the process to play itself out. I read an article earlier this week discussing the disgusting, the disturbing, and the unacceptable rise in violence in our communities, particularly in low-income communities of color. And one of the interviewers was the director of, one of the interviewees, I should say, was the director of the Jordan Area Community Council, Kathy Spann. And her plea to us was, stop playing games with our kids' lives. Stop playing games with my life. So in that spirit, I will be voting no on this amendment, this proposed adjournment to August 10th.
All right, thank you. Councilmember Cunningham.
Thank you, Madam President. So I will be supporting this today because while we as a collective council maybe have not done a lot of creating space, that does not mean that individual council members have not been doing a lot of public engagement. I chose, for example, to not be an author because I wanted to do more work, a co-author on this because I wanted to do more work with community engagement and talking to my community. I, for example, had a Ward 4 survey specifically for Ward 4 residents, and there were upwards of 1,000 responses. I'm sorry, close, maybe around 800 if I remember correctly, which is a lot of participation in our community. And over 75% wanted it on the ballot. That didn't mean that they supported it or didn't support it. They want the ability to be able to vote for it. I will say that Black folks who are quoted in papers do not speak for all of the Black folks in our city. I do a lot of work of engaging Black folks in North Minneapolis who are not quoted in papers frequently, and they want to be able to vote on this. They've asked for significant change. They see that our current system, the way that it is structured, is not working. It is not keeping our community safe. We are playing with lives by maintaining the status quo. We are treating doing something different as a greater risk than keeping things the way that they are. And I believe that keeping things the way that they are is more dangerous than following down a path of creating a new structure that allows for us to actually build a system of public safety that is based on research and evidence and rooted in community and the public health approach, as well as justice and restorative justice. I think that for us to be intentional about getting this on the ballot this year actually allows democracy at its grandest scale. Folks being able to vote for themselves, how they would like for us to restructure public safety in our city from a charter, city operations and structure perspective, I think is one of the grandest ways that we can put democracy into action. We are working on what would fill that new structure. That is the work that I am helping to lead alongside Sasha Cotton, Joymar Stevens, and Brian Smith with the Future of Community Safety Work Group. We will be doing a report back next week about what the work is ahead. There is a lot of work that we will be doing over the next few years in order to move through a robust community engagement process into an implementation plan. For us to delay getting this question in front of our constituents this year limits our ability to actually implement recommendations that will be brought forward during the community engagement process. The state has a Department of Public Safety. Like many other cities have departments of public safety. They don't just have standalone police departments. We are not pursuing something that is so scary and unknown. There are lots of models, even with the state in which we operate under, is exactly what we are talking about doing right now. So I think that the status quo is more dangerous for the lives of people that I represent. As we've seen with the uptick in violence, the continual leaning more heavily on the Office of Violence Prevention, despite the fact that they do not have the resources and the structure to be able to have the level of authority and influence that is necessary to be able to meet the level of demand at the scale of which it is being asked to do. We have to do something about it. The reality is that not only that change does not always happen on a convenient time scale, and we have a responsibility as individual council members, not just as a collective legislative body, to engage and educate our constituents from an informational and as unbiased as possible perspective, so that our constituents are able to be a part of this process. I do not think it is our best interest to not put this on the ballot, particularly given that I've heard from a large number of my constituents in North Minneapolis, which includes Black folks, that they want to be able to vote on this in November. So I will be supporting this today and ask my colleagues to do the same. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Fletcher.
Thank you, President Bender. I just wanted to sort of put this in context a little bit, because just to remind us all of what this council has done, right? Like, we voted unanimously to send this to the Charter Commission, and we signaled to the public in that process that we were asking for consideration for this item to be placed on the 2020 ballot. And so it is both the consistent thing to do and the transparent thing to do to make sure that we take the procedural steps to be able to follow through on that as the Charter Commission does their work. So I think it would actually be inspiring of cynicism for us to send that signal and to ask hundreds of people to give their time to log into the system and provide their public testimony to the Charter Commission, which is where we told them to go to weigh in on this topic. And they provided testimony, a majority of which was supportive of the charter change, an overwhelming majority of which was supportive of it being on the ballot. And then for us to not take the steps necessary to follow through on our procedural part of this, to be able to forward it if the Charter Commission does the work that we've asked them to do and sends this back to us in a timely way, I think that would be very disappointing to people, and I think it would be something where people would feel misled and they'd be right. So I think it's very important that on this procedural motion that we support this and that we're consistent in telling people that the thing we told you a few weeks ago, that's the thing that we're asking the Charter Commission to consider and the thing that we're asking to move forward, is in fact the thing that we're doing, and that we're being consistent and we're following through. And so I'm supportive of this, and I would ask everybody to be supportive of this. Obviously, we get to hear additional public testimony on the 10th. and make a decision at that point, depending on what the Charter Commission sends to us, whether they send us recommendations for revised language or whether they just send us a recommendation on our language. We get to make a vote on the substance on the 10th. But this procedural move is really just following through on the public instructions that we gave to our constituents about how to engage and about the ways that their engagement would be valued to make sure that we continue moving this forward. So I hope that we don't inspire cynicism and sort of undermine this procedural move today. I think it's very important that we give, I think it's very important that we give people a chance to vote, but certainly I think it's important that we send a signal to the Charter Commission that we're going to honor the work that we've asked them to do by moving the process forward on our end.
Thank you. Councilmember Ellison.
I really want to thank my colleagues, Cunningham and Fletcher. I think that they put it as well as I could put it. I also want to say that, again, this is not about us making this decision. If this was about this council, the 12 of us making this vote, you know, to just make this change unilaterally, then I think that that would be a different discussion. But we're discussing whether or not we're going to put it on the ballot. And I've also done a number of engagements, a number of sort of you know, social distance park engagements and backyard engagements with constituents, and I think that there is not consensus on where people land on this issue. And when I say that, I mean that in a good way. I mean that in the way that I think we need a vote to decide where the community is landing. I think as far as you know, Councilmember Cunningham said this well, but Black folks in Minneapolis and across the country and across the world are not a monolith. They're not going to share a singular opinion. You know, Councilmember Cunningham and I and Council Vice President Jenkins all represent significant Black constituencies, and even we are not in a position to say definitively what the Black opinion is on this charter change. We need to send this to the voters, and I think that we have asked the Charter Commission to sort of lean into do their best as far as public engagement, and I think a lot of people have engaged. The other thing I'll say is that the status quo is what is harming our communities, whether it be that we don't have a significant strategy to prevent violence in the first place. We only have a policing response after the fact, whether it be that policing itself brings harm to our communities, not only with the murder of George Floyd, but also with the ketamine situation, also with the lying about the untested rape kits. And we could go down the line about individual stories of our constituents having bad interactions with the police. We certainly heard some of that today. And so when I think about playing games with our communities' lives, to not do this is to play the game. To lay back and say that the status quo can last a little bit longer, that is to play the game. And I'm certainly in it to save lives, and I think it's inappropriate for us to say that we're just going to sit back, lean back, play games with our communities' lives, not have a significant response and lean into violence prevention, and say that the status quo is good enough for now. And watch people die in the process. I'm not for that. And so I will be supporting this, and I hope my colleagues will also support this.
Thank you, Councilmember. I put myself in queue to just reflect a bit on the procedural portion of the question before us. And I just did want to clarify, so we could hold a public hearing at the POGO meeting. There have been a number of comments and frankly some complaints about the length of those meetings already. So I was cognizant of folks' time and the length of that meeting, which would certainly become significantly longer with the addition of a public hearing. But that is certainly an option to consider. I'll say that the meeting will already likely be longer than the one we had previously. The committees that I serve on in normal times typically go that length, just each one themselves. So maybe I have a particularly heavy committee workload, but I do actually think we've been quite efficient in getting 8 committees worth work of done in a few hours. But anyway, I'll just note that would be an option. The rule that we are suspending is related to how we forward items from POGO. So I could ask the clerk to expand on that a bit if you would like, council members. And so, you know, we've certainly set up our rules to follow a typical rhythm and pattern of meetings. In this case, following that typical rhythm of patterns with this forwarded to the next council meeting that would come after POGO would not allow time for this to be on the ballot in 2020. So, you know, when we started this process with our unanimous vote, knowing even then, I think that folks had different perspectives and opinions on the substance of the amendment to the charter. We knew that there was a compressed timeline to have this go to the ballot in 2020, and certainly council members may disagree at the time when we vote on whether or not to send it to the ballot, but I did make a commitment myself to the authors and added my name as an author in order to help guide this through the council process. So I wanted to uphold that commitment, and is why I'm bringing this consideration along with the other authors today. So Mr. Clerk, did you want to add anything about that rule and how the forwarding timeline works? I know you talked about it earlier, but maybe just to clarify, again, that sort of process of forwarding from POGO to the adjourned meeting.
Certainly, Madam President. The rule we are suspending is Rule 6, Section 7A. This rule provides the process by which the standing committees report back their recommendations and recommended actions to the City Council after their meetings. And that rule says that a committee report after being adopted is transmitted for presentation at the next regular meeting of the City Council. And so the language of that rule locks in the timing so that we both internally for policymakers and staff understand how that cycle works, but also for the public. So as they're following along, they understand that process. And so by changing the flow that's described by the council rules is simply what we're doing. We're just adding another meeting of the City Council so that that flow can be interrupted. As a consequence, it does require a suspension of the rules to allow the council to do what it wishes, assuming a majority of the body concurs, and would add an adjourned session, which is essentially a continuation of this meeting. So instead of ending this meeting, we would continue it forward to Monday, the 10th, and at 10 a.m. pick up where we left off. The only item on the agenda when this meeting continues on August 10th would be the consideration of a report from the Policy and Government Oversight Committee, should it have any recommendations to make on the proposed ballot question related to amending the charter. That, of course, is dependent upon the action of the Charter Commission in determining whether it will accept, reject, or offer a substitute on that proposal, which, as we have mentioned, is being considered by the Charter Commission right now. Assuming they do, we have already suspended our rules to allow them to submit directly to the Policy and Government Oversight Committee the next day. So I would assume that on August 6th, we'll know at the POGO committee meeting what options are available to the council, and the POGO committee will, in its due course, make a recommendation on that question and submit it then to the continued meeting on August 10. And at that point, as I mentioned before, by suspending the rule, it would be proper on a motion for the council to then take up and dispense with the question of whether or not to forward a ballot question to the voters in the November 3rd, 2020 general election to amend the charter. Happy to answer anything further.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. And just to underscore, the difference here would be between having that considered at the council meeting on August 10th instead of August 14th, which is a change of 4 days earlier. And this would have its own meeting, which would allow for that public hearing to take place. So folks would be able to follow along and participate in this one item rather than having it part of a very large agenda at the council meeting, or in the case of having the hearing at POGO, a very long POGO meeting. So that was just some of the thinking behind why it made sense to have that one standalone meeting to allow for a public hearing. Councilmember Goodman.
Thank you, Madam President. I didn't actually turn on my request to comment on Mr. Carl's comments, but I'll note under his regular or our usual process, there would be enough time. We don't have to suspend the rules, our own rules, in order to make this happen unless there's a concern that the mayor will veto it and that there wouldn't be time for an override, which makes me suspect that that's the reason we're doing this. Even though the mayor hasn't said that he would veto it, you'd want to leave enough time for that. So I think there is more of an ulterior motive here than just we want to do it faster for a public hearing. I actually asked to speak because I'm a little bit disturbed about the ongoing reference to a unanimous vote by the council to support this charter amendment and put it on a ballot. I said during the council meeting that I supported moving this forward so that the Charter Commission would have an opportunity to have public hearings and make a determination as to whether or not this was something ready to go to the ballot, that it made sense, and it was of the ballot. And I, like many of you, have listened to almost all of the public testimony in real time on my television from people testifying, and it's become pretty clear to me in the time between when we moved this to the Charter Commission and where we are now that there are a number of significant problems and questions. The first one being we don't even have a public engagement plan for how we envision public safety going forward in front of us as of today. And so I have colleagues and constituents reaching out to me saying, I want to help, I want to get involved, I want to help figure out what public safety will look like, but I don't have anywhere to send them because there is no public engagement process set up as I speak here today. At least if there is, I'm unaware of it. 2, we don't have a plan for what public safety would look like should this charter amendment pass. And I have a lot of constituents who want to vote for something. They believe in systemic and transformational change, but they want to know what they're voting for instead of voting against. And we clearly have no plan in place. And lastly, I'm very concerned about the overall timeline here, that should this get on the ballot and pass, we will not be able to have a plan or public engagement in place to transition from the police department to a Department of Public Safety by May of next year. And so should it pass, I'm worried that we will have a level of chaos that will result in no one understanding who is going to respond to 911 calls, if anyone, what is our method for public safety going forward, and how do we figure out what makes the most sense to keep every member of our community safe. So from where I sit, what I heard from the public hearings were a lot of people who want to do it, but no answer to the question, what is the plan? What is the public engagement, and how will we work within the timeline in order to effectuate the change that might or might not be voted on by the public? So I would suggest that this charter amendment is not the transformational change that we need in this department. It's just not. And letting the council be in charge of the police and creating a Department of Public Safety without a plan, without any public input, is not transformational change. And so I don't think that we should be hurrying up our process to get this on the ballot when those 3 questions have not been answered. I understand and respect Councilmember Cunningham is putting into the message that the future of community safety update is happening on the 6th, but we're being asked to vote on this right now. I wish we were not. We certainly could have just kept our normal process. I would have kept my mouth shut, but it looks like what we're doing here is we're trying to make the process go faster just in case the mayor decides he's going to veto this. And how could we override a veto that I can't imagine we'd have 5 votes to even override in the first place? So it seems like there's some procedural maneuvering going on here in a very unnecessary way that created this very conflict-oriented debate that I am just simply not comfortable with. I need to know what the plan is for what public safety will look like. My constituents deserve an opportunity, as everybody else's does, to participate in what the public engagement will look like. And we need to know if something goes on the ballot that we have the ability to implement it. And as I sit here right now, I do not believe we have the ability to implement what this charter change is suggesting by May of next year. And so I'm just really disappointed that we're fighting over nothing in this situation. We all want the same thing. which is change in the way we handle public safety in the city of Minneapolis. This is not that transformational change, and this is not getting us there. It's just creating more chaos and confusion for the public that is worried about public safety in every ward in this city right now. And I wish we could just get our act together and determine how we can work together to figure out how we're going to do this and stop focusing on a charter amendment that puts us more in charge. If nothing else, this has proven maybe we shouldn't be more in charge of the police.
Okay, I see Councilmember Gordon and then Jenkins and Q. I do want to note that if we do not move forward with this adjustment to the schedule, then the item would come to POGO. I'm happy to hold a public hearing at POGO. That will mean that council members will have to attend a long meeting on that day after the POGO meeting. I am perfectly willing to sit through that public hearing. I have been perfectly willing to chair 8 committees that are going through POGO, but I'm getting a lot of complaints from colleagues who are having trouble with those long meetings. But that is certainly an option. And if we do not make this change, then the item will simply go to the city council meeting that following Friday. So I'm not really sure, we can certainly debate the merits of the proposal now, but the question before us today is whether or not to have a separate public hearing on Monday, August 10th, at an adjourned city council meeting, which I proposed in order to accommodate the complaints that I have heard from colleagues about the length of our POGO meetings. Councilmember Goodman did mention that there is a timing issue related to a mayoral veto. I have spoken with Mayor Fry about that. I won't speak with him in public, but speak for him in public. He certainly can do that for himself. But yes, this timeline would also allow the city council to, as is our right, consider an override of a potential mayoral veto of the question. That doesn't mean that it would pass. It certainly may not pass, but it would allow the council to do our work in time for the question to go on the ballot this year. If council members don't support putting it on the ballot this year, you could simply vote no at any of the meetings that we are describing. So the procedural question before us today is whether to have a hearing at the POGO meeting, which I am happy to host, or to have a special adjourned meeting to have the hearing there. Councilmember Gordon.
Thank you very much. And I just wanted to kind of focus in on the decision that we're making as well. I know that, and I'll note that it's actually really useful for me to hear the concerns that people have about the general issue and how we're going to do transformative change and what doors should be opened before other doors and things like that. But really, we're just talking about a scheduling problem. And I just want to admit really clearly, of course, when we talk about scheduling and everything that we're passing, we account for the opportunity for the mayor to have his or her influence over it and do the veto. So that's incorporated into this, as well as looking at our schedule. And it makes sense to me that we'd have a separate meeting where we could look at this. And this is the way we do it. We adjust our schedule. And I would suggest that just as those of us who might want to say, let's do it in enough time so we can have the full process play out by the 21st so we really know what's happened, and the council has an opportunity to respond to a veto, people who don't want to meet on the 10th, maybe I'm sure they're also obviously thinking about this too and saying, oh, maybe we just want to let the mayor have an opportunity to kill it, and so then we don't really have to make the decision and the discussion ourselves. So I'm absolutely fine with doing it the 10th. I think we should do it in enough timeline so that the mayor has the full, I think it's 3 days plus Sunday to review it before he makes a determination, and just follow our process so that we can get our work done to meet the outside limitations put on us by getting it on the ballot in November. So I'm definitely supportive of making this small schedule change and giving enough notice to the public and taking a good time at our public hearing so we can hear from them, and then deliberating and discussing the issue itself and whether or not to put it on the ballot at that time.
Thank you. Council Vice President Jenkins.
Thank you, Madam President. I just want to state for the record that I am absolutely well aware of the fact that the Black community is not a monolith, and as evidenced by the fact that a group called Black Visions is one of the groups that is a strong proponent of defunding the police, which has led us down this path of changing our charter to accommodate that that demand. I absolutely stand by my vote to bring this charter amendment forward and have it on the ballot. I am not in any way talking about the substance of that charter change. However, I am talking about the fact that there is a broad segment of the African American community who feels like their voices are not being heard in this conversation. Yeah, maybe they are being interviewed in newspapers and on television and many other venues. However, no one on this body is really uplifting those voices. And so those have to be taken into account. I think this change that we are proposing right now, maybe it is necessary, but the perception is that we are playing political games. That's the perception. And so that is prompting me to make the decision that I'm making.
Councilmember Palmisano.
Thank you, Madam President. Thank you for honoring this very difficult discussion with lots of input and feedback on both sides. And I know I started off with some comments earlier, but I just want to come back to me, this is more than a scheduling problem. To me, it seems clear from this conversation that we don't have a scheduling problem. It's still very possible to put this on the ballot as long as the mayor, you know, we're really trying to circumvent every single piece of our process. To me, this was about opportunities for more input, and it would have been about maybe scheduling more meetings. It sounds like there's so much time built in that we could have 3 meetings and public input sessions on this. For example, I'm not saying that's the best opportunity or the best method of engagement. Certainly it isn't for voices that have gone unheard for so very long. But nowhere in this conversation am I hearing that we're going to rush and go and get more feedback from the public. It just seems like a way that we're allowed with a 2/3 vote of our council to get rid of our rules and do other things. And I am interested in letting this be a vote for the public, but we've already voted to expedite this. I don't see a need to expedite this even more, even faster. I just don't see a need. So thank you for honoring all of us with this time.
Okay, thank you. Are there any further comments on this motion? I'll just note that this motion does require 2/3 vote for approval. If it fails, I will go ahead and schedule a hearing for that POGO meeting. So please adjust your schedules as needed for that meeting. You need to do that anyway. Those will be long meetings unless we restructure to have back the standing committees. But we will let folks know about those scheduling adjustments that may be needed. Are there any further comments or discussion? Seeing none, clerk will call the roll.
Councilmember Gordon.
Aye.
Councilmember Kano.
Aye.
Councilmember Reich.
Aye.
Councilmember Fletcher.
Aye.
Councilmember Schrader.
Aye.
Councilmember Cunningham.
Aye.
Councilmember Ellison.
Aye.
Councilmember Goodman.
No.
Councilmember Johnson.
Aye.
Councilmember Palmisano.
No.
Vice President Jenkins.
No.
President Bender.
Aye.
There are 9 ayes and 3 nays.
Thank you. That passes. And therefore we will adjourn this meeting to Monday, August 10th at 10 a.m. I'll direct the city clerk to follow up on those items to prepare us to take up and act on any recommendation that we may have from the Charter Commission and the POGO Committee on the proposed charter amendment at that time. With nothing further and without objection, I will declare this meeting adjourned. Thanks so much, everyone, for your participation in our meeting today. We are adjourned.